In this video, I'm going to help you pick the very best civilization for you in Rise of Kingdoms. And you can trust my guidance because not only do I release this guide every single time a new civilization is released into the game, which by the way, I've gotten over 500,000 combined views on all those videos, but I have two accounts over 100 million power, and my main account has over 27 billion kill points. All right. So I play this game to the extreme. I have rallied. I have garrisoned. I have spent ridiculous amounts of time and money field fighting and doing all of these things. So I've got the range of experience. And with that range of experience, let me just give you one very quick summary of this entire video, which is, hey, if you're a brand new player to the game, pick China as your starting civilization. You'll very quickly, after you've completed your building, switch over to Germany. And then you'll stick with Germany for a long time. Once you know what you're doing, and you will at this point, you'll switch over probably to Ottoman, and that'll be for open field fighting. You're welcome. That's the summary of the video. But really, use the timestamps to jump to whichever part you'd like, because I'm going to break down in tremendous detail each of the things that you need to know, and you'll probably learn a lot along the way. In fact, probably some experienced players have a lot to learn as well about the way that each of these things works in game. And what are these things that I'm talking about? Well, picking a civilization gives you several benefits. First and foremost, it is going to dictate which commander you get more of their sculptures of at the start of the game. Secondly, there's a bunch of bonus stats that you can see over here. And thirdly, there is also a special unit. We'll talk about base stats and special units and why they matter specifically for you later in the video, because that's a slightly more advanced topic, but actually very easy to understand. So let's start things off, though, with what civilization should you start with? What civilization do you switch to and why in order to grow? And then what do you use for open fielding in the end game? And what do you use for rally garrison in the end game? All right. And let's start with growth. You're going to pick China as your starting civilization. There are other alternatives, but these days we're all just locked in on China as being a top civilization choice. In fact, I've made videos about what are your best starting civilization choices and breaking that all down with exact details. I'll have a card at the very end of the video if you want that information and want to go more in depth. But very simply, China gives you a building speed boost. At the start of the game, you're rushing your city hall level. And so building speed is very valuable. Once you have gotten to either City Hall or Academy level 25, you're going to switch off of China. But before you do, I just want to point out that you're getting action point recovery, which is really outstanding. If you're active in the game, your green bar is going to fill up, and when it does, you use that to rally barb forts, battle barbs, which in turn gives you experience for your heroes, resources, speed ups, and more. So the action point recovery is actually a super relevant benefit, and you also get a troop defense boost, which is really nice because it's all troops that get this boost. Many civilizations boost only one troop type with their little percent boost here, but the percent boost is not what's important at the start of the game. You're picking this more for Sun Tzu as an amazing commander to work on and focus on at the start of the game, and also the building speed boost, and you're good to go. All right. Now from here, you're going to switch to Germany. And the reason I say Germany is that civilization you're going to switch to is because you get a training speed boost. By the time you're switching to Germany and your city hall's 25, and maybe even you're pushing to Academy level 25, you're going to realize that you're ready for more troops, and having the training speed boost is going to be really nice. You also get the action point recovery boost, but doubled the amount you're getting from China. And instead of getting 3% defense for all troop types, you're now getting 5% cavalry attack, which as it turns out is really good for rallying barbarian forts anyways, which is something that you'll be doing. And for battling barbs, it's going to be fine. So Germany is the switching point, and a lot of endgame players switch to Germany, by the way, before they train large amounts of troops. I believe that the break point was something like 1 million T5 troops, and it's worth spending what it takes to switch civilizations to train up those troops while you have the training speed boost from Germany. And let's talk about that for a minute. How is it that you switch civilizations anyways? Well, when you hit switch, if you have one of these tokens, you can switch using that token, or you can spend 10,000 gems. My strong recommendation is that you use a token and you don't switch very often. And you will get tokens for free from events, especially as a new player, at a somewhat regular interval, okay? Only a big spender who's switching between sort of rallying and garrisoning and then training a ton of troops all over again is going to be switching more frequently. And in that situation, you can get them from your alliance shop. If one of your alliance leaders puts one in here for you, it'll cost you some amount of currency to go and get if your alliance officers restock a civilization change. And you can see that here, that the civilization change lets you swap without paying the 10,000 gems, which is really nice. All right. So at this point, as a new player, what you needed to know is actually, it's all here, okay? You needed to know, start China, switch Germany, and down the road, you're going to switch to an open field civilization. So why would you stick around for this video? Because you're going to learn a lot about the way the game works by watching what I talk about next, okay? So let's talk about what you would use later in the game for open field. Open field means you are fighting against other players and you're spending lots of resources and speed ups to go and do that. And there is tremendous alignment among endgame players that once you're ready to battle, and even in the early game, by the way, you can battle with Germany and be perfectly fine, okay? I'm talking like through your first 3 KvKs, that's where lots of kingdoms all go fight each other. You could be sticking with Germany and be fine for your field fighting. It's not going to make that much of a difference. But players who make their way to T5 quickly or really are pushing their power or are in the end game are then going to switch most likely to the Ottoman civilization. Now, the Ottoman civilization gives you archer health, which is nice. But more importantly, it gives a 5% march speed boost for all of your troops. And it gives you commander skill damage of 5% for, again, all of your troop types. The reason this civilization ends up being powerful for the open field is because not only does it have the archer benefit, and every civilization has a unit-specific benefit, but it's giving benefits to many troop types that all benefit when they're in the open field, which is really great. Because although not all of your marches might do skill damage, all of your armies in the open field are going to be marching places, and you get the march speed benefit there, okay? So this is the civilization that's got the most universal benefit, and archers are in a very dire need for health anyways as a stat. So that is a nice pickup to have as well. This is the civilization that most people battle with in the open field, in the end game, that value their ability to push the field. But if you are perhaps a more value-oriented player, your strategy might be slightly different. What I have done in the past and seen people do is they use France. France gives you a health boost for all troop types. The wood gathering speed is basically irrelevant, but the hospital healing speed of 20% is pretty decent if you do lots of field fighting. Now, here's a pro tip. Most people think they do lots of field fighting to actually get benefit from this, but they do not do nearly as much as they say they do. And so if you don't actually go and field fight a lot, how do you define that? There's probably some number of days worth of hospital healing speeds we could account for there. But if you're not spending, I would argue, hundreds of days worth of speed ups every KvK healing, you probably should have been another civilization. Okay. And even then, people who field fight a lot, but are in the top kingdoms, are not going to use France because they would rather hit harder in the field. And by virtue of hitting harder and moving faster, they will take less wounds and thus need to heal less. Okay. So France is a civilization option for people that fight a lot in the field, that are struggling for speed ups, and do genuinely use hundreds of days field fighting and using sort of healing speed ups, all right? And then you might use France. Otherwise, there is one other new civilization that we need to talk about, and it's the reason I made this video at all, is now we have the Mayan civilization. And I do think that the Mayan civilization has some potential in the open field. And the reason that I say that is that although it is also an archer civ and it has defense instead of health, which funny enough, defense is not a bad stat for archers. There's a lot of archers that give health these days. And we don't need to get into the details here, but the less of a stat you have, the more valuable that stat is. Health and defense, you want to, of course, raise both of them, but When you have a disparity between health and defense, then what that would mean is that the stat that sort of gets them closer to being even might get you the most value. For a lot of archers these days, defense is actually potentially a better stat, which is kind of wild, but you've got the defense here, but you also have a normal damage boost of 3%. Normal damage boost is kind of an interesting thing to see because all of your troops, when you directly target an enemy, will get the benefit of this normal damage boost. In fact, normal damage should also boost your counterattack damage dealt. So the Mayan civilization has a strange utility in the open field, but the consensus still remains to use Ottoman Empire. March speed plus skill damage. Even if some of your marches don't do skill damage, they all benefit from that march speed. Seems to still be consensus. Mayan is certainly very interesting, and this was sort of teased to players as being relevant to ranged combat, and the reason is that ranged armies are not moving around as much. This is where you set up a siege tower, and if you haven't seen this yet, you'll get there eventually, okay? And those players, since theoretically you set up in a strategic position, you don't need to move around as much, they really enjoy, I think, the benefit of this boost to normal damage, right? And those are your sort of considerations for open field, all right? The simple version, as I said at the start of the video, is you start with China, you switch over to Germany at some point after you've done enough construction and you're satisfied, and then you switch to a combat civilization, okay? Now, if you're going to rally in Garrison, we're in a whole new level of punch, okay? And I will review every civilization in this game, by the way, to talk about exactly when and why you would use them, because there are niche cases for some of these civilizations. But let's first talk about rallying, because a lot of civilizations have a rallied army damage bonus. If you rally something without having the civilization that gives rallied army damage for your troop type, you are just doing it wrong. Like, respectfully, you're doing it wrong. The only way in which that might not be the case is if you also garrison and you think you might garrison more than you rally. And we'll talk about those differences. But if you're rallying with cavalry, you're going to use Arabia. They have 5% cavalry attack. The damage dealt to barbs and other neutral units is kind of irrelevant. I guess for barb forts, it's value. But damage dealt by rallied armies increased by 5%. Okay, that's where it's at. That's why if you're rallying calves, you're going to use Arabia. That is what you use. For archers, you've got Egypt, rallied army damage of 5%, archer attack of 5%, and building and research speed of 1.5%. Okay? Theoretically, if you're an early game player and you're an archer rally lead and you're still pushing your technology, you get the nice double dip here into building speed and research speed. It's kind of cute. I'll give it that. And then from there, if you are infantry, you're going to use Greece. Okay, rallied army damage of 5%, 5% infantry health, which is amazing for infantry. They have tons of defense on infantry typically. So as I was saying, with like the more of a stat you have between health and defense especially, the more you might want the other stat to sort of get them closer to even. Health is just really, really good for infantry because you can have a lot of defense. So your defense is going to be way up here. Your health is going to be down here. Getting your health higher is going to be really great. All right. So for rallying infantry, that's your pick. Easy peasy, no questions asked. All right. Then we can talk about garrisoning. Garrisoning is sometimes the same and sometimes different. Let me explain. For infantry, as it turns out, 5% health is better than anything else you can do. So if you're going to garrison infantry, you're going to just stick with Greece anyways. So for infantry rally and garrison, Greece is really nice. There is, in my opinion, a bit of misconception about Vikings, that you could go with the 5% attack and 3% counterattack. I don't think that's very good, personally. So I do not think that it's worth being Viking for your garrison choice. I would rather just be Greece. And that's it for infantry. For cavalry, this is a weird situation. You just don't have a lot of great stuff. Chances are, if you're a garrison, you're also a rally, so you're just going to be Arabia anyways. But if you wanted to specifically be a cav garrison, you most likely are going to use Byzantium, which is going to give you a 5% cavalry health boost. And if your cavalry do skill damage, There's a chance you might be Ottoman, but I think you get more benefit from the health than you do the skill damage. But it might be one of those like practicality things where like it's better for open field and also you use it for Garrison. To be determined, but it's likely to be Byzantium. The other benefit that Byzantium gives is a hospital capacity boost, which actually is a nice convenience these days. The hospital capacity percentage lift here is based off of your base hospital capacity. In other words, you're going to get all these bonuses to hospital capacity, but it's the percent boost is going to be off of your base, not like the total current hospital capacity you have. Anyways, hospital capacity boosts are really nice. This ends up being like something like 30,000 extra troops for your hospital capacity, which if your city were getting rallied or swarmed, ends up being super valuable to have by a lot. But for typical rally or really garrison situations, you're really just here for the health, all right? And you could argue, depending on what cavalry combination you're using, that the 5% defense from Spain could be better. As I was mentioning, depending on like what your commanders are and what equipment you have, your defense might be lower than your health, in which case getting a little bit more defense would actually give you pound for pound potentially more than getting a little bit of health. Spain is interesting sort of in the early game. If you're smashing lots of barbarians and neutral units, you get 10% extra experience. That's like Holy Site Guardians. It's fine. The resource production is pretty nominal. Some number of people use this civilization specifically for their farms because they level up all their resource production buildings and they just collect resources from those. It is a strategy. I have not followed that strategy. Okay, I have I think never been Spain as a civilization. And I have been many of these other civilizations. So the other consideration for cavalry... No, I think that's it. We talked about Germany. We talked about Arabia. Oh, yeah. We need to talk about archer garrison. I think if you're an archer garrison, you're likely to use the Mayan civilization. And it's not a coincidence that this civilization released at a time about when we got some new commanders for archers that do true damage, which is really wild. They do this thing called a mighty heal, and when they heal themselves, they do damage. But this civilization could be a very good for the sort of new archer garrisons, and it increases archer defense, increases normal damage of all types, which is outstanding. Mayan civilization would probably be what I would pick if you're using the new archers to garrison, all right? Now, this brings us to some civilizations that we simply didn't talk about, and so I want to go and do that now. There are niche cases for each one of them and when you would use them, so let's first talk about Rome. Rome gives you a march speed boost, which is outstanding, an infantry defense boost. The only time I've seen this used is for top tier Ark of Osiris teams, because march speed is god tier in Ark of Osiris. It's almost like the whole thing is march speed. Everything is march speed. So in that situation, if you're an infantry garrison, you want the defense and the march speed, and that's more valuable than just having the health. All right. From here, we can talk about Britain. Britain is something that I've used on farms that I fill garrisons with. In other words, it is a meta strategy in Rise of Kingdoms to make multiple accounts that all they do is they sit there passively training troops, you bring them into KvKs, and you just fill garrisons with the tier 4 troops that come from that account. And the garrison capacity boost here is kind of neat. It basically gives you a lift to the number of people that can be reinforcing your city. If you're wondering, hey, what is that number, Chiskel? You go to your Alliance Center, and you can see here my reinforcement capacity is 1 million. With this boost, I believe it's 1.2 million you can have in your city, which like in KvK, you'll get other boosts. I think you can get to like 3 million with KvK technology in the end game. And then, so the 20% boost still only enhances this base value. So it would be 3.2 million total in KvK with Max Tech and Britain. And I mention that because it is actually a major convenience when people are reinforcing through your city to have more capacity. This ends up mattering a meaningful amount, and I get a troop training speed boost. So my farm used to be Britain, and my farm was like 80 to 100 million power to fill with, which I know that sounds insane, but like consider subscribing. I'm a pretty crazy player of this game. I think you'll get value from my tips and tricks, and I've done the full range of things in this game, man. Anyways, I push the boundaries, and I stream all of it, so you can see. But the allied garrison capacity in that context is really good. The training capacity or speed boost is really good on this farm where I'm sending, literally, I've put 10 million tier 4 troops into the bin, killed them off in a single KvK on my farm account, which is nuts. But Britain is good for that. And that's its primary role. And that's honestly, if you want training speed, you'd rather just be Germany, generally speaking, for the AP recovery, right? If you're going to stick with it for a while. Most people don't, though. They switch to it, do their training, switch back. Depending on when you're fighting, right? Some people switch to Germany in their off season, depending on how much access you have to tokens. And then when they're fighting, they use their combat civ. In terms of other civilizations that we haven't talked about yet, Japan gives a gathering speed boost. This was actually the starting civilization I chose for this account. So if you're wondering, like, will picking the wrong starting civilization matter? Not really. My account's fine. I started with Japan. Japan is a suboptimal choice. Although, if you're actually going to scout the entire map, the scout March speed boost is like hilariously relevant then and only then, but not anymore in the game. Scouting has, I think, become a thing that like people are not very interested in spending time doing for like very obvious reasons at this point. Once you do it once, it's like, okay, I've done that. I never want to do that again potentially. So yeah, the March speed boost here is not all that relevant. Some number of people use this on a farm account for the gathering speed boost for gathering all types of resources. It all depends on what your strategy is. If it's more of like a Spain resource production strategy, or you're actually actively logging into all your farms all day long, good for you if you've got the commitment to that. Now, Korea is a weird civilization that only whales need to switch to ever. And the only reason you switch to it is if you're using like 1,000+ days worth of speed ups in, maybe not 1,000+ days, 1,000+ hours worth of speed ups in like one quick run. And if you're rushing technology, 3% research speed is worth it. It's worth the 10,000 gems to switch to Korea, go through and actually speed up a ton of research, and then immediately switch to something else. This is not a civilization you use for long periods of time because you'd rather have something that gives you more passive benefits. It's something you switch to, you do an absolutely jaw-dropping amount of research as a Kraken or whale, and then you switch to something else. And you're just here for the research speed boost, and that's it. And that actually covers, quite literally, every single civilization in the game. But we're not done, because we haven't talked about these special units. But Chiskel, how do special units work? So I have made dedicated videos about special units, and they genuinely don't matter for the conversation, in my opinion, of what civilization you're going to be. In a perfect world, you would pick a civilization where you have more armies in the open field of that troop type. Because, okay, the special unit does have more base stats. Now, these base stats only matter for you. They don't matter for rallying. They don't matter for garrisoning. They only matter for you and the troops that you bring into the field. In other words, your armies and your troops have these base stats, and each player contributes their base stats to how a rally or a garrison is going to go. And all of the percentage stat boosts in the game, right? Like, it's funny, we spend all this time talking about attack percent, defense percent, health percent. What are those modifying? Most people don't know it's modifying the base stats of your units. So all these percentage-based boosts are enhancing these stats you see on the screen, the base stats. And if you wanted to see, where are the base stats, just cool, you can go, swing in, and hit the info button, and it shows you for your units what those base stats are. Obviously, the higher your tier of troop, the higher your base stats are. And you can see, by the way, typically you get about, I want to say 13-ish extra base stats for the special unit for your civilization, okay? So if I were to switch to the Mayan civilization, you can see here that if we go to the tier 5 version of this, so you can see this is getting about 6 more base stats of defense and 5 more base stats of health. And that's not much, 11 base stats? Especially when you consider the grand total of base stats that this thing has is 639, right? It's a small amount, but hey, more is more. And when you rally your garrison, what happens is that each of your troops is sort of contributing base stats and these numbers to the rally or garrison. You do not elevate everyone in your rally or garrison to your special unit type. Okay, so what you'll see in a garrison or a rally is in the report, lots of people contribute their different troops of their different tiers. So long story short, yeah, In an ideal world, because I run 3 infantry marches and I run 2 archers, 2 cavalry, I would be an infantry civilization because my infantry special unit here has slightly more base stats. And so 3 of my armies get a benefit. But these days, by the way, you typically want a balance of troop types in your armies that you bring in the open field. And so a long, long time ago, you used to really consider focusing all in on one troop type and have like even as many as 4 armies of that troop type and like 1 army of something else or 2 armies of something else, depending on when you're in the end game, you get up to 7 armies at a time, which is kind of wild. But these days, that's not a thing you do because the power level of new commanders is too high. And so you need to have all the different troop types sort of represented and the ability to field them because you don't want to miss out on the next gen of cavalry or archers because the power level is, again, generally so high. Having a balance of different commanders and troop types represented is better than going all in on one troop type. There was a time where one troop type specialization was a thing. So in a perfect world, you're picking a civilization where, like, you know, if you're an archer player, you're Ottoman. But I just want to emphasize that even in Ark of Osiris League, the most competitive game mode in this game, everybody runs the Ottoman civilization with the exception of rally garrison leads. And the reason they pick it, even if they only run 1 archer army and they run 4 other types at a time, is because the march speed is that good. So I just wanted to emphasize that even in the most hyper-competitive situation in the game, the special unit type doesn't really matter all that much to them. So, like, don't sweat it, is what I'm trying to say. It'd be easy to, like, get, you know, worried about it. And I know I did for a very, 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 very long time. But, you know, I'm Greece. I have 3 armies that use primarily infantry. Good for me. If it needed to be something else, then I'd use something else. And, like, you know, it is what it is. But I'm an infantry rally, infantry garrison. So I've moved all in case that isn't clear from the set of gear I might have flashed on this screen earlier. If you enjoyed the vid, consider subscribing. Throw a like on here. Here's my best infantry gear. It's not, it ain't bad, man. The amount of stats, bro, a new player would look at this and go like, what the hell's going on here? The amount of stats I get from this is insane. I got some pretty decent stuff, but whatever. Throw a like on here, subscribe if you want more tips, tricks, guides, and videos designed to help you get value and smash your enemies. If you want to see the best starting civilizations and you want even more information about that, okay? I'll have a card in the end screen. I talked about it way in depth. And alternatively, if you just want a guide to help you get value and gain power, no, you know what? I'll give you this guide, okay? The guide I'll give you is the one explaining the difference between stats and why it is that you might want defense or health. You're going to learn so much by watching that video about the way the game works. You're just going to be nuts. Card will be in the end screen. Hope you enjoy that one. Consider subscribing. And until next time, you have fun smashing your enemies. Take care, everybody.